public listening session for the town of Norfolk's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, MVP for short. I'm Paul Smith. I'm a senior project manager at Beta Group. We're a civil engineering firm currently doing some work in town, primarily with the DPW department. In this project, we had a core team of myself, Richard McCarthy, the Norfolk Town Planner, and Barry Riviere, Norfolk Assistant DPW Director. Our goal as a core team was really identifying personnel in town and community organizations to partake in a workshop, which was held on March 11th. Try to get a broad spectrum of people so you can get unique perspective as it comes to the topics that we were going to discuss at this workshop. The workshop was all about combating the effects of global warming on a community basis through the eyes of people in the town of Norfolk. So that workshop was held on March 11th. It was an all-day event from 9 to 3. We had 12 participants from a broad spectrum of the town and town departments. Some logistics on today's presentation. It's currently being recorded and will be broadcast on Norfolk Public Broadcast Television, and I believe YouTube afterwards as well. Following the presentation, I'll have a question and answer session. Any questions you have that come up during the course of the presentation. I'm finalizing the draft findings report. We're going to post that on the town's website. I'm hoping for Tuesday to post that. I'll leave it up there for 2 weeks for questions, comments, anything that a reviewer may have. You can address that to me. I'll give you my email address at the end, but anything as it relates to the findings report, you can ask me directly and we'll go from there. So an agenda of tonight, I'll give you a program overview on the MVP program itself, some science and resource information as it relates to global warming, state of Massachusetts, and then specific to Norfolk County. I'll give an overview of the workshop, what was done and accomplished at that workshop, the findings of the workshop, the hazards we discussed, the features that the participants found were important, and the actions that ultimately were the conclusion of the program itself, the actions that the participants felt would be worthwhile pursuing should they be able to procure a grant. Overview of the program itself. It's a Charlie Baker established program from a few years ago. Executive Order 569, integrated climate change approach, ultimately with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to combat climate change, and then setting up a program to combat it not only on the state level, but on the community level as well. That third bullet point down for preparing the impacts of climate change really is what we're talking about here on the community basis, and that's the municipal support, the support mechanisms that town by town they would need to do some of these programs that the state is hoping that towns will take advantage of. Looking at the state as a whole, different towns are in different capacities as it relates to the MVP program. The towns colored in white really have not participated yet. The towns in yellow, which Norfolk being one, meaning that they're in the planning grant phase, which is really phase one of a two-phase process. Beta Group approached the town of Norfolk about a year ago to ask if they were interested, because we were doing some other work in town, to procure a grant to have this workshop and to see if they were interested, and they were. So we're successful in getting them the grant and holding that workshop. So they're in phase one of the phase two process. We're in the final stages of phase one. We've held the workshop. We're having the informational meeting tonight. And then we're going to submit the required documentation by the end of June to become one of the communities that's colored in blue. And at that point, you're eligible to submit for action grant monies for some of these projects that you identify in the workshop. Just because you're in blue doesn't mean you get the money. You still have to put forth a worthwhile project as to the eyes of the state. And if the state deems your project's worthwhile, you're lucky enough to be one of these states that has a diamond on top of the blue. And that means you've received these to pursue a project that the town evaluated and determined during the workshop. And it's not, small money. 2 months ago, they awarded a little over $11 million to 52 communities. So we're talking a couple $100,000 on average. I'm not going to talk a ton about the action grant tonight, but it's a 75% grant with a 25% community match. So it's a good portion, a great percentage of free money to go after some projects that can be beneficial to a community. So again, here are the two grant opportunities. RFR1, the MVP planning grant, that's the stage that Norfolk's in. That's a picture of a workshop being held. That's what we did on March 11th. RFR2, MVP action grant, that would be the next phase. This is just a picture of a community moving forward with a project that they identified within the planning grant stage. The state really does love nature-based solutions. They view these advantageously in your submission. So we're talking about nature-based solutions as they use natural systems, mimic natural processes, and work in tandem with traditional approaches to address natural hazards like flood and erosion, drought, and heat islands. So we're talking green infrastructure and low-impact development. If you have this in your package, it's viewed more favorably than those that don't. I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change. I think most people who are watching this have experienced what they could deem the impacts of climate change. We're all noticing, we had a mild winter, not much snow. It's getting warmer. Rainfall seems to be more intense, more frequent. Storms seem to be more, and these high severity storms seem to be more intense and frequent as well. In terms of temperature, since 1895 as a whole, this is Massachusetts average numbers, gone up 2.9 degrees Fahrenheit. Growing season has increased by 15 days, almost 2 weeks since 1950 for a growing season. Sea level rise of almost a foot in the last 100 years. Heavy precipitation of 55% since 1958. Heavy precipitation increase of almost a little more than half is huge. We're talking increased flooding, increased erosion. These are, these can be major problems, and it's only going to get worse. So that was Massachusetts as a whole. Now speaking specific to Norfolk County, by 2050, we're anticipating to see an additional 22 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and an additional 41 days above 90 degrees by the end of the century. Almost one additional consecutive dry day annually by 2050, and a little over one by 2090. Now, you may not seem like that's a big number, but when you're talking about a drought period of 8 days, 9 days, 10 days without raining, now you're adding another 1 or 2 days on that. You're talking about 1 or 2 more days of drawing down your aquifer, of not irrigating your crops. It could be a major issue. Another 1.8 days annually with precipitation greater than 1 inch. So we like to say a 1 inch storm is a pretty big storm. And in March, I felt like we were getting a 1 inch storm once a week. So this is, these again contribute to flooding, flash flooding, erosion. This could be problematic, and it's almost 2 days annually more by 2050, and over 2 days by the end of the century. So what are these impacts as we're talking about increasing temperature, increased precipitation and downpour intensity, and changes to rain and snow patterns? Well, with temperature, you're talking about an increase in heat-related illnesses, changes in the growing season, larger demands on energy systems. If we're talking 40 plus days of 90 degrees plus, it's that much more people are going to be putting their air conditioners on, and it's really put some strain on the electrical system. Increased risk of flooding with the downpour intensity, water quality impact to agriculture and natural ecosystems. With reduced snow cover, you're not going to have that snow thaw. We didn't have it this year, so we're not replenishing our aquifers like we typically would if you had a lot of snow over the winter. So that's going to exacerbate drought events and impacts the habitats and species. So a workshop overview. Ultimately, the goal of the workshop was to come up with some action items for some of these issues the town is going to be facing. So the first step would be to characterize the hazards that the participant felt the town was facing, then identify community vulnerabilities and strengths, identify and prioritize community actions, and then overall prioritize down to 4 or 5 actions that the participants would feel worthwhile moving forward with. So when we started in the morning, we had 12 participants, and there were 3 beta group facilitators there, myself included. We broke the 12 participants into 2 groups. So we had small group activities, and then larger group activities were more when you had to try to build a consensus. So we started with the first activity of the day was in small groups, and that was to characterize the hazards. Examples of hazards could be ice and wind, storm events, fires, wildfires, sea rise, and drought conditions. The facilitator's role was to really facilitate discussion amongst the participants. We would ask questions that would really facilitate a really positive discussion and worthwhile discussion. Some of these questions would be like, what hazards have impacted your community in the past? How often were they? In what ways? How do you anticipate these hazards will change in the next 10 to 25 years? What have been the impacts to operations and budgets, planning and mitigation efforts, etc. So after the small groups had listed a bunch of hazards that they felt the community was facing, they had to report back as a large group and come to a consensus. So reporting back were wind and severe storms, lightning, invasive species, flooding, drought, brush fires, and trees falling down. So from these, we had to narrow it down to 4, and it had to be a consensus amongst the 2 groups. The 4 were narrowed down to wind, severe storms, and lightning. We kind of grouped these together since they're all really related to severe storms, invasive species, flooding, and drought. All right, so each group was responsible for filling out this matrix. So those 4 that we just identified for the top hazards would be filled in on the top. So that was really the big consensus that they had to come together on until the end. After that, you're breaking back into your small groups to fill out the rest of the matrix, starting on the left where you see features. We'd be going through infrastructural, societal, and environmental features. And these could be things that are positive in the community or things that really are vulnerable, an asset that's really vulnerable. Examples of infrastructural could be stormwater system, communication system, dams, water system. Societal could be shelter facilities, schools, churches. Environmental could be wetlands, state parks, trees, etc. So here's a zoomed in version of that. So the features, infrastructural, societal, environmental. Once that's filled out, you'd have to fill out the location. Is it a specific spot in town or is it town-wide? Ownership, it could be the town, it could be a private ownership, state, federal. And then V or S. V would be vulnerable. Is it a vulnerability for the town or is it a strength? Is it an asset for the town? Once that is filled out, you'd have the whole matrix filled out except for what's below the highlighted hazards. That's where the groups would have to come up with action items to address these features, so oftentimes it's trying to address a vulnerability, but it could be at the same time, it could be something in town that's an absolute strength. And it's something that maybe the participants felt you didn't want to go neglected. You want to keep that strength and do whatever you can to keep that strength or even make it better. And ultimately at the end, you had to prioritize whether this was a high, medium, or low priority, and then a short or long-term goal. Some of the findings for infrastructure. So these are the vulnerabilities and strengths for the infrastructure category, the infrastructure feature. Dams, culverts and stormwater, roadway infrastructure, drinking water supply in the water system, communication systems, electrical facilities, the commuter rail, private wells and septic systems, and the wastewater treatment facility. Now, the wastewater treatment facility is just a small facility in the center of town. It just treats a handful of customers. It's not a broad cross-town wastewater treatment facility. Societal, the rural character was important to the participants, government, school, library, and community buildings. Norfolk's existing strong community ties, the prison, parks and recreation facilities, emergency preparedness plan, the new public safety building, and the elderly population and housing for the elderly. Environmental, open space, including the Mass Audubon Sanctuary. Tree canopies. This came up a lot. Trees, all of Norfolk roads are scenic roadways, which means the trees are right up against the road. It's a double-edged sword because it's great with the tree canopy, but at the same time, with increased storm events, trees become a liability as well. Flood control, Army Corps of Engineers, gypsy moths and invasive species and plants, vector-borne illnesses, water bodies for recreational purposes, as well as streams in the Charles River, wetlands, wildlife, and soils, and some hazardous waste sites that are in town. So the two groups were a blue group and red group. So here's the blue group's completed matrix. So underneath their features, you can see some of what I was talking about, electrical infrastructure, the prison, schools, emergency preparedness plan, trees, who owns, who the ownership is of that infrastructural feature, and then ultimately an action item, a tree clearing program, political outreach, develop pest control management plan. And then to the right, H would be a high priority, L being a low priority. And I'll get into all of these in the subsequent slides. And here's the red group's matrix as well. So findings, summary of identified actions. Here's a list of all the actions. Evaluate and address culverts and stormwater systems. Create an operation and maintenance plan for the culverts. Develop an emergency access detour plan. Restrict private water supply use. This is mainly during town drought conditions where the availability of water for the municipal water system is at risk, to possibly curb the use of private water supply wells because they contribute to the available water supply. Tree clearing pruning program, possibly a replacement program for trees that need to be removed, and a preventative maintenance plan. This all ties into the town bylaw as well, relating to scenic roadways. Upgrade backup power systems. Evaluate dams. They needed repair, removal, or possible decommissioning. Continue a wastewater treatment study currently ongoing. Improve communication systems. Bolster schools and town buildings to incorporate showers. So this is primarily to fabricate schools in such a way that if there was a massive displacement of residents, that there is the capacity of existing town buildings to be a shelter of one form or another. Encourage more towns to be part of the emergency operations center. So this was a common thread at the workshop, that the participants were proud of this emergency operations center in town. It's currently participated in by 4 towns, including Norfolk. But they'd like to keep this as a strength and possibly expand this to abutting towns to partake in this regional approach. Establish a memo of agreement with the bus company in case of emergency. This would be kind of related to the schools and such, that if you had a storm that was severe enough that we needed to relocate people, that maybe we could have some sort of memo or agreement with that bus company. And this goes back to the strong community ties. Implementation of green infrastructure at schools, open space transfer plan, transfer of development rights. It lends itself to maintaining open space and focus in development in certain parts of town. Frequent updates to the town's emergency preparedness plan. Public outreach to the elderly population. Develop a pest control management plan. Develop an inventory of contaminated sites. So this would be identify and evaluate the contaminated sites and what could possibly be done with them instead of just leaving them as is. Could they be cleaned up and redeveloped, cleaned up and open space created? Develop a top priority hazard strategic plan. All right, so this is a summary of the action items that both groups came up, comprehensive of the entire matrix. So that was all small group activity. Now the time would come that each small group has to pick their top 5 or so and report back as a large group and come to a consensus. So this fosters a dialogue about what's important to the participants, and ultimately these were the ones that were agreed to, that were identified as the priority actions that the town should consider moving forward with if they were fortunate enough to receive an action grant. So we grouped dams, culverts, stormwaters, and roads together. They're all tied into stormwater. They all play a role in conveyance of stormwater. So that would be an assessment on all of those assets. And then a tree inventory and maintenance program. This would be tied into the existing town bylaw because nothing's going to happen unless that's addressed as well. Vector-borne illness and invasive species. This is like a reporting and community relations program. Contaminated sites inventory, assessment, and recommendation. I just got into that about possibly development of contaminated sites. All participants, again, like the Emergency Management Center, they feel it's important to keep it as a top-notch facility and would like to encourage additional towns to participate. And then lastly, maintain the rural character. It's important to the residents in Norfolk to maintain that character, keep open space, and transfer of development rights. So the next steps, I'm finalizing the report. I'm hoping to have that available on the town's website next Tuesday. I'll have a 2-week questions, comments period, so that'll end on around June 10th. The submission of that report, once I get questions and comments back, I'll include those within the findings report, and that gets submitted to the state by the end of June. At that point, Norfolk moves from the yellow category to the blue category, and it allows them to, in the future, pursue grants to go after some of these action items, project-based. Questions, if anyone has them, they can direct them to myself, Paul Smith. I work at Beta Group. I can be reached at psmith@beta-inc.com. Once all that happens, the community would then be eligible to apply for future grants when they become available. There is a grant, RFR, action grant RFR out right now, but I believe it's closing on June 16th. So we're going to have to look towards the next one, which gives us time to look at, the projects that make sense on the community scale and figure out how that's going to fit into the town budget and all that stuff. With that, I'll open it up for questions if anyone has any questions.
I don't see any hands up. Oh, I do now. Donna Jones has a question, so thank you.
All right.
Go ahead, Donna. You can.
Is there anything the citizens can do to help you?
I think the biggest thing that citizens can do is provide input. We had a broad spectrum of people at the meeting, but the more perspective we have, I think the better. Everyone has their own unique perspective and can see something or an issue from a different lens that maybe was missed or absent during the workshop. So if you have, if you read the report or heard anything here today that you think you'd like to provide comment on, by all means, and I can include it in the report.
So next person is Val. Has a question?
Hi. So I live here in Norfolk. I also teach environmental science at Norfolk Aggie, and I'm concerned about all of the affordable housing developments that are going up. I think the amount of energy that is being used to create the houses, one thing, is tremendous, and then all of the energy that is going to be used while the people are living there is also tremendous. Is there any way that we can either limit the amount of developments that go up, or can we make these net zero houses? Is there any possibility to force the contractors to make them energy efficient?
That's a good question. I mean, Rich, there's nothing town bylaw wise that you guys have with limitations on that type of development stuff, right? In terms of energy usage?
So we do, so we are a green community, which was designated this past year. So we do have implemented the stretch code through the building, state building code. So that is a higher level of efficiency threshold that new buildings need to adhere to. So that is in place right now, that people are adhering to for new construction. We don't, I can't really think of any. I mean, there are, I suppose some people are taking advantage of different energy efficiencies, and so we don't have a program specifically, but retrofitting in their homes and looking at solar is another way to help with, from an energy usage standpoint related to, what we're talking about tonight, MVP.
Yeah, and green infrastructure at schools was brought up, and that's possibly a way to offset some of that concern as well.
Rich, wasn't the energy committee looking at a lot of stuff like this throughout town?
Yeah, so they did their plan. What's the plan called? It's green communities, and then they went through their assessment, and they have a bunch of action items for energy efficiency projects that they're going to be applying for the town for different energy improvements. So it may be lighting, it could be new boiler system, heating system, HVACs, insulation projects that they have I'm not sure what they're targeting for the first go around, but we do. So that just became available to us. So that was,
yeah, I think it was recently. So I mean, it might not address the 40Bs that we're dealing with, but we'll be able to do a lot of stuff in-house within the town to address energy usage. So I mean, I think that's a good point to focus on.
So the one that I guess would probably tie a little bit better to the 40B in relation to the housing is what what was listed there relative to a TDR program, transfer development rights, and it's kind of a little bit of a passion of mine as a planner to try to try to consider the transfer development program, which essentially is you take areas where you want to preserve them, transfer the development rights to areas where you want to focus the new housing development. And I think that I really feel as if Norfolk is one of those towns that would really benefit greatly from it. So in discussions that I would like to try to move that forward more, and in conjunction with that, I think we need to try to move a little bit more proactive as far as the open space goes, talking with property owners I think it would be nice to have like a working group amongst town people that would want to volunteer to talk to property owners that as they go along and they're considering, they may have property that they're looking to sell. Maybe there's other alternatives that combination where the TDR program is one way to try to give compensation for development rights, but then protect from future development in conjunction with CPC. So it's kind of a broader idea, but I really think that Norfolk could take advantage of that. So that's kind of why we've tied it into here. So that's
I do think it's quite alarming how fast Norfolk is being developed, and I think it is really important to preserve our open space in regards to climate change. And I do think it's really important that we preserve as much open space as we can.
Yeah, I would.
That was a common theme at the workshop. I think all the participants echo your feelings.
I did see, did Pamela still have a question? I saw her hand.
No, hey guys, this is Andy Bakanowski. I'm using my wife's Zoom because I can't get to my other one. So anyways, I was going to wait, Rich, till you stop talking about the Energy Committee since I sit on the Energy Committee, we're putting in for 130 some odd thousand dollars for lighting of the schools. And again, the green community stuff that we're applying for is only for town buildings. We're running into, let's just say, a difference of opinion on how the bidding should go, but we recapitulated to the folks at DOER, and so we're still looking to spend about $18,000. And Barry, if you want to give Blair a kick tomorrow, if you're working, I've left a message for him to talk about, because we have $18,000 left to reach our cap for the green communities, and I know there's a few things that were talked here tonight that we are interested in possibly teaming with, specifically either resiliency related stuff that does apply or can fall into the green communities, I'll call it realm for town buildings. Regarding some of the other stuff that Val talked about, if you go back to town meeting probably 10 years ago, I rewrote the earth removal bylaw. And Rich, I don't know if you've ever seen that, but basically it looks at methodically removing and clearing trees and keeping certain size calipers and stuff like that. That was shot down by the stacked audience of developers that came in. So, you know, those are the things that we're running into for the town. I mean, clear cutting the 25 Boardman Street. I mean, that was quick. But again, so it sort of has to happen too. But also, Val, just so you know, I also sit on the Board of Assessors in town. So when property goes into either conservation restrictions and stuff like that, the lost tax dollars for that has to come up someplace. It has to be made up someplace else. So there's that financial thing that has to be looked at too. And very few people consider that. When the town took some property down off on the Franklin side, that was $4,000 that came off the tax roll. Well, $4,000 over several thousand pieces of property really isn't much. It's maybe $1 or $2 for each, for each property that it went up, but that has to be made up somewhere. So the other one option is you simply allow development to go on to basically have new growth, and that sort of funds the increasing expenditures of the town. So it's a financial balance as well as a resource balance, as well as a tree balance, air balance, and everything else like that. So. I don't know. I mean, I could keep going on talking about this for hours because some of the things that we're doing here, I do as part of some of the renewable work I do, as well as some of the energy efficiency stuff that I do for a job. So, this is an interesting project simply because it's so encompassing. And Paul, just so you know, since I used to work at the prisons for 20 years, if you want to know about what's going on over there, I can let you know. There's some stuff I can fill in. I saw some of the stuff. That's not really a secret place, but there's enough information that I could give you that's not security related that would help fill in some things, and some things are problems and some are. So.
Sir, what was your name again?
Andy Bakanowski.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it.
I'll spell it. My email is Bakanowski. I'll spell it BAKINOWSKI@verizon.net.
And Carolyn has a hand up now.
Thank you, Andy.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Mecklenburg. I'm the regional coordinator for the MVP program for the Greater Boston area. So I'm not here as a resident of Norfolk or anything like that. I'm here from the MVP side of things. And I just wanted to comment that there's been a lot of great conversation about different bylaws and regulations, and that is absolutely a category of MVP action grant funding. It was to take a look at a town's bylaws and regulations and design guidelines, development guidelines, to see how they could become more climate resilient. So all these things that you're discussing are certainly up for grabs for exploration in the action grant phase. And I also wanted to comment that in terms of what residents can do in this stage of the process, absolutely, as just to reiterate what Paul is saying, is read the plan, and share it with other residents that might be interested and have things to contribute. If you're interested in learning more about the MVP action grants, we have a website. So if you just Google Massachusetts MVP action grants, you can see some examples and some past projects that were funded to give you a sense of what kinds of things we've funded in the past. So yes, thank you. For those of you who are able to come tonight to hear Norfolk's, see what Norfolk has done at their workshop. So thanks.
Thank you, Carol.
Is there any other questions, comments? All right. I think that it's probably a wrap for tonight, Paul.
I got nothing else, so that's good.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
and
Thanks,
we'll,
thanks, Paul. Good job, buddy.
thank you. And we'll get that out on the web and push that out to people. As
Yep.
well as, like we just said, this video will be available on Norfolk Community TV. Oh, wait, one last question. Donna has a question. Go ahead, Donna. Donna?
Okay, now I got it.
All right.
I heard the grant would cover 75%.
That's correct.
Does that mean the other 25% has to pass town meeting?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, until we identify a project that we're going to move forward with. So I think Rich, myself, and Paul will be working on this after we get all the information in. We'll look for a viable avenue for us to pursue a grant for the MVP program. There's a lot of cross-reference stuff between our MS4, stormwater, tree removal. There's a lot of stuff going on that we could get a grant for. So we'll figure that one out and let everybody know from there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
Good. Great. Well, good night, everybody. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Carolyn. Thanks, Barry. Have a good night, everyone.
guys.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Talk to you later.